Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called One Night Stand During a Trip. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely, thank you. The sun hung low over the rugged coastline of Oaxaca, Mexico, painting the sky in hues of gold and coral, the kind of light that makes everything feel like a dream you don't want to wake from. The beach stretched out in a quiet, untamed sprawl sand, the color of warm ivory, speckled with driftwood and smoothed pebbles, kissed by waves that whispered secrets as they retreated. It was the kind of place where time felt optional, where the world's noise faded into a hum, leaving only the rhythm of the ocean and the pulse of your own heart. Hailey Tran sat alone on this shore, her bare toes curling into the sand, a book splayed open on her lap, its pages fluttering lightly in the salty breeze. At 30, she was a woman carved by choices some bold, some reckless, all hers. A creative strategist from San Francisco, with roots tangled in Vietnamese heritage, she'd come here to escape, to breathe, to untangle the knots of a life that had started to feel like someone else's. Hailey was striking in a way that didn't demand attention but held it once you looked. Her hair, dark as midnight, fell in loose waves past her shoulders, catching the sunlight in glints of obsidian. A few strands danced across her cheek, and she tucked them behind her ear with a distracted grace. Her skin, a warm golden brown, glowed under the sun's caress, kissed by days spent wandering this coastal haven. She wore a simple linen sundress, white as sea foam, its thin straps slipping slightly off one shoulder, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone line, so soft it seemed drawn by an artist's hand. The dress hugged her frame just enough to hint at the body beneath, a slender waist that flared into hips, that swayed like the tide when she walked, legs long and toned from years of city hikes and impulsive adventures. Her eyes, almond-shaped and deep as the Pacific, held a quiet, storm part longing, part defiance. They flicked from her book to the horizon, as if searching for something she hadn't yet named. She'd come to Oaxaca after saying no to a proposal that should have been her happily ever after. Her ex, a good man by most measures, had knelt before her in a San Francisco restaurant, ring gleaming, words earnest. But as he spoke, Hailey felt a cage closing around her life of predictability, of brunches and mortgages, and expectations she didn't choose, so she'd left. Not just him, but the city, the job, the version of herself that had started to feel like a costume. Oaxaca was her rebellion, her reset, her chance to remember who she was when no one was watching. She scribbled in a leather-bound journal now, her pen moving in sharp, purposeful strokes, fragments of thoughts, half poems, questions she didn't expect answers to. What if I never belong anywhere? She wrote, then paused, her lips parting slightly as she tasted the salt on the air. That's when he appeared. Noah Beckett emerged from the haze of heat and light, like a mirage taking form. 33, a wanderer with no fixed address, he was the kind of man who looked like he'd been shaped by the road. His skin was tanned to a deep bronze, the kind of color that comes from months under open skies, with faint lines etched around his eyes from squinting into sunsets. His hair, a tousled mess of chestnut curls, caught the breeze, some strands bleached lighter by the sun, others dark and defiant. It fell just long enough to graze the nape of his neck, curling slightly where it met his skin. He wore a faded linen shirt, unbuttoned halfway, revealing a chest sculpted by years of carrying a backpack through jungles and desert's broad shoulders, tapering to a lean torso, muscles that spoke of strength earned, not performed. The shirt sleeves were rolled up, exposing forearms corded with veins, dusted with fine hair, and marked by a small tattoo of a compass on his left wrist, its needle pointing nowhere specific. His jeans, worn soft and frayed at the hems, hung low on his hips, hinting at the V-shaped cut of his abdomen, a detail that made the air feel a little warmer. A vintage Leica camera hung around his neck, its strap weathered but sturdy, the lens glinting in the sunlight. Noah was a photographer, a nomad who chased moments rather than destinations. He'd just finished a year-long journey through South America, Patagonia's windswept cliffs, the Amazon's green heart, the salt flats of Bolivia that looked like God's own mirror. Oaxaca was a pause, a few days to rest before the road called again. But as he walked the beach, his bare feet sinking into the sand, his eyes caught on Hailey, and something in him stilled. She was unaware of him at first, lost in her journal, her lips moving slightly as she murmured a line to herself. The sunlight spilled over her, catching the curve of her shoulder, the dip of her spine where the dress fell away, the way her fingers gripped the pen with a quiet intensity. To Noah, she looked like a painting, a woman caught in a moment, so fleeting it begged to be captured. He adjusted the camera, his fingers moving with the ease of muscle memory, framing her against the sea and sky. But he didn't press the shutter, not yet. Instead, he took a step closer, his shadow falling across her book. "Mind if I steal a shot?" His voice was low, warm, with a faint gravel that sounded like late nights and open roads. It carried a hint of a Midwestern drawl, softened by years of crossing borders. Hailey looked up, startled, her eyes narrowing slightly as she registered him. Up close, Noah was even more arresting. His jaw was strong, dusted with a day's worth of stubble that made her wonder, unbidden, what it would feel like against her skin. His eyes were a hazel that shifted in the light green, one moment, gold the next, fringed by lashes too long for a man who looked so rugged. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that added a story to his face, and his lips, full and slightly chapped, curved into a smile that was equal parts boyish and knowing. He held her gaze, not flinching, not pushing, just waiting. "Steal?" she said, her voice cool but curious, one eyebrow arching. Her lips, full and naturally rosy, quirked slightly, betraying a spark of amusement. She set her pen down, leaning back on her hands, her posture open but guarded. The movement made the dress shift, revealing more of her thigh-smooth, sun-warmed, the kind of skin that looked like it would feel like silk under a lover's touch. Noah's smile widened, and he raised his hands in mock surrender, the camera swinging gently against his chest. "Borrow, then. The light's hitting you just right. It's kind of perfect." He tilted his head, studying her, his gaze lingering on the way the sun caught the curve of her cheekbone, the faint freckles dusting her nose, the way her hair framed her face like a halo. "I'm Noah, by the way. Not a creep, I promise. Just a guy who sees something worth keeping." Hailey's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't here for strangers, for connections, for anything but herself. But there was something in his voice, in the way he stood close enough to feel real, far enough to feel safe, that made her pause. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, The way his hands, strong and calloused, held the camera with a reverence that felt personal. His body was a map of experience scars, tan lines, the slight asymmetry of his smile, and it stirred something in her, a curiosity she hadn't felt in months. "Why me?" she asked, her voice softer now, testing him. She tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder, exposing the elegant line of her neck. The gesture was unconscious but magnetic, and Noah's breath caught for a fraction of a second. He crouched down to her level, resting one elbow on his knee, his eyes never leaving hers, because the way the sun's falling on you right now, it's like you're part of the sea, part of the sky, but also just you. I don't know how to explain it, but I know I'll regret it if I don't try to capture it. His voice was earnest, but there was a playful edge to it, a warmth that made her feel seen, not judged. Hailey studied him, her lips parting, as she considered his words. Her heart gave a small, unexpected, lurch, not fear, not attraction, but something in between. The kind of feeling that comes when you stand at the edge of a cliff and realize you might want to jump. She closed her book, her fingers brushing the worn cover, and leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees. The movement brought her closer to him, close enough to catch the faint scent of salt and cedar on his skin. "One shot," she said finally, her voice low. A challenge wrapped his hand. The one not holding the camera was close enough that she could see the fine lines on his knuckles, the way his fingers flexed slightly, as if itching to reach for something. The camera, the moment itself. "Don't make me regret it, Noah." His grin was instantaneous, a flash of white teeth that made her stomach flip. "Deal," he said, standing and stepping back, his movements fluid, like a man who'd learned to navigate the world without leaving a trace. He raised the camera, his eyes locking on hers through the lens, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them, the sound of the waves, the heat of the sun, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Smile if you want," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "But you don't have to. Just be you." Hailey didn't smile. She looked at him, her eyes steady, her lips parted just enough to hint at a breath, a thought, a possibility. Her body was relaxed but alive, every curve and line of her seeming to hum with the energy of the moment. The sun caught the gold in her skin, the dark fire in her eyes, the way her dress clung to her like a second skin, and Noah's finger hovered over the shutter, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He pressed the button. The click was soft, final, a sound that felt like the start of something neither of them could name. Noah lowered the camera, his eyes meeting hers again, and for a moment neither spoke. The air between them was thick with possibility, with the kind of tension that comes when two people realize they've just stepped onto a path they didn't plan to take. "Thanks," he said, his voice rougher now. "Thanks," he said, his voice rougher now, like he was trying to anchor himself. He ran a hand through his hair, the curls catching the light, and Hailey noticed the way his bicep flexed under the rolled-up sleeve, the way his chest rose and fell with a breath he hadn't meant to hold. She nodded, her lips curving into a small, private smile. "Don't make me famous," she said, her tone light, but her eyes searching his, looking for a reason to stay in this moment a little longer. Noah laughed, a sound that was warm and unguarded, and slung the camera over his shoulder. "No promises," he said, then hesitated, his gaze flickering to the empty stretch of beach beside her. Mind if I sit for a bit? The view's pretty good here. Hailey's heart gave another lurch, but this time she didn't fight it. She shifted slightly, making room, her dress riding up just enough to reveal the smooth expanse of her thigh, the kind of detail that made Noah's throat tighten. "Sure," she said, her voice steady but laced with something new curiosity. "Maybe, or the first spark of want. But don't expect me to share my book." He grinned again, settling beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the faint brush of his arm against hers as he leaned back on his hands. The sand was warm beneath them, the sun sinking lower, and the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what they'd do next. They didn't know it yet, but that glance, that click, that moment when their eyes met over a camera lens, it was the beginning of something that would burn bright and brief, like a comet streaking across a night sky. A story written in sunlight and sand, in touches and silences, in the kind of love that doesn't need a name to be real. The sun had dipped lower, its golden fire softening into a blush of pink and lavender that spilled across the Oaxaca shoreline. The beach was quieter now, the day's heat giving way to a breeze that carried the scent of salt and seaweed, curling around Hailey Tran and Noah Beckett like an invitation to linger. They sat side by side on the sand, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, the space between them alive with an unspoken current. Hailey's book lay forgotten beside her, its pages fluttering like a heartbeat, while Noah's camera rested on his knee, the lens catching the last glints of daylight. The world felt small, intimate, as if the sea and sky had conspired to carve out this moment just for them. Hailey leaned back on her hands, her fingers sinking into the warm sand, her body relaxed but alert, every nerve attuned to the man beside her. Her white sundress clung to her frame, the fabric shifting with each breath, outlining the gentle curve of her breasts, the dip of her waist, the flare of her hips that seemed to beckon the eye. The dress's hem had ridden up slightly, revealing the smooth expanse of her thigh, the skin glowing in the twilight, soft and inviting, like a canvas begging for a touch. Her hair, dark and wild, spilled over her shoulders, a few strands catching the breeze and grazing her cheek where a faint flush had begun to bloom. Her lips, full and naturally rosy, parted as she tilted her head, stealing a glance at Noah. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed before, the faint freckles dusting his nose, the way his stubble caught the light, the scar above his eyebrow that made her want to ask questions she wasn't sure she had the right to. Noah sat with one knee drawn up, his arm resting casually across it, his body turned slightly toward her, as if drawn by a magnet he couldn't resist. His linen shirt was open just enough to reveal the planes of his chest, the muscles shifting subtly as he breathed, a dusting of dark hair trailing down to where his jeans hung low on his hips. Those jeans, faded and soft, hugged his thighs, hinting at the strength beneath legs that had carried him across continents, through deserts and mountains, and now sat folded beneath him on this quiet beach. His forearms, exposed by rolled-up sleeves, were strong, veins tracing paths under tanned skin, the compass tattoo on his wrist, a silent promise of roads yet to come. His hair, those chestnut curls, was a mess of sun-bleached streaks and darker roots, falling into his eyes as he looked at her, his gaze a mix of hazel and gold, warm and searching, with a sadness that lingered just beneath the surface. He'd been the one to break the silence after sitting down, his voice low and easy, like a song you didn't realize you'd been waiting to hear. "So," he said, a smile tugging at his lips, "what's a woman like you doing alone on a beach like this? Writing a novel? Planning a revolution?" His tone was light, teasing, but his eyes held hers, steady and curious, as if he genuinely wanted to know. Hailey laughed, a sound that was soft but real, her head tilting back slightly, exposing the elegant line of her throat, the pulse beating faintly beneath her skin. "Neither," she said, her voice carrying a hint of defiance, a spark that made Noah's chest tighten. "Just figuring out who I am when I'm not saying yes to things I don't want." She looked at him then, her eyes locking with his, and there was a challenge in them, a dare to see her, really see her, without the filters of expectation. Noah's smile faded slightly, not from discomfort but from recognition. He leaned forward, his elbow resting on his knee, his body angling closer, the space between them shrinking to something electric. "That's a hell of a reason," he said, his voice quieter now, rougher, like he was letting her glimpse something he usually kept hidden. "Most people don't have the guts to run toward themselves like that." Hailey's lips parted, a breath escaping as his words landed. She hadn't expected him to understand, not so quickly, not so deeply. She shifted, tucking one leg beneath her, the movement making her dress slip higher, revealing more of her thigh, the curve of her calf, the delicate arch of her foot. Noah's eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second, a reflex he couldn't help, before returning to her face, his gaze warmer now, hungrier, though he kept it leashed. "What about you?" she asked, her voice softer, probing. "What's a guy with a camera and a compass tattoo doing on a beach like this? Chasing pictures or running from something?" He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the sand, through her. "A bit of both, I guess," he said, running a hand through his hair, the curls catching the light, his bicep flexing under the linen sleeve. "I've been on the road a while, South America, mostly. Patagonia, Bolivia, Peru. The pictures keep me sane, give me a reason to keep moving. But yeah, maybe I'm running, too. From questions I don't have answers for." His eyes met hers again, and there was a rawness there, a vulnerability that made her heart dress hug her tighter, accentuating the swell of her breasts, the slender line of her waist. She wasn't trying to seduce him, not consciously, but the air between them was thickening, charged with the kind of tension that comes when two people start peeling back layers. Noah hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of his camera, his thumb brushing the worn leather strap. "Like why I can't stay in one place too long," he said finally, his voice low, almost a confession. "Why every time I get close to someone, I start looking for the exit. Why my mom keeps asking when I'm gonna settle down, and I keep dodging the call." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And Hailey saw it, the weight he carried, the kind of loneliness that comes from choosing freedom over roots. She nodded, her lips pressing together, her eyes softening. "I get it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just said no to a ring, a house, a whole life that looked perfect on paper. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I am." She laughed, but it was tinged with something bittersweet, and she looked out at the sea, her hair falling across her face, shielding her for a moment. Noah watched her, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the way her lips curved when she spoke, the way her fingers played with a strand of hair, twisting it absently. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was the way she carried her choices, the way she sat in her own skin, unafraid of her own edges. He reached for the bottle of local beer he'd set in the sand, its glass sweating in the warm air, and held it out to her. "Too crazy, then," he said, his voice warm, inviting. "And to figuring it out, one beach at a time." Hailey's eyes flicked to the bottle, then to his hand strong, calloused. The kind of hand that could build a fire or hold a lover with equal care. She took the bottle, her fingers brushing his, the contact brief but electric, sending a jolt through her that she hadn't expected. His skin was warm, rough, in a way that made her imagine how it would feel elsewhere on her wrist, her waist, the small of her back. She lifted the bottle to her lips, taking a slow sip, the cold beer sharp against her tongue, her throat moving as she swallowed. Noah watched, his eyes darkening slightly, though he kept his smile easy, his body still. "Thanks," she said, handing it back, her voice steady but laced with something new, a spark, a question. Their fingers brushed again, and this time neither pulled away quite as quickly. She settled back, her body angled toward him now, one arm propped behind her, the pose stretching the dress across her chest, highlighting the soft swell of her breasts. The curve of her collarbone, where a bead of sweat had begun to form, glistening in the twilight. They passed the beer back and forth, the act becoming a rhythm, a small intimacy that felt bigger than it should. The conversation flowed like the tide, easy, then deep, then light again. Noah told her about the salt flats in Bolivia, how they looked like a mirror to the sky, and the time he got lost in the Amazon, saved by a local fisherman who spoke no English but shared his dinner. His voice was a storyteller's, rich with detail, his hands moving as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. Hailey listened, her eyes bright, her lips parting in a laugh when he described falling into a river while trying to photograph a jaguar. But it was his body, she noticed, the way his shoulders shifted, the way his chest rose with each breath, the way his thigh flexed when he adjusted his position, the denim stretching taut. She shared her own stories growing up in San Francisco, her Vietnamese grandmother's kitchen filled with the scent of pho, the way she'd always felt split between worlds, never quite fitting. She talked about her job, crafting campaigns that sold dreams she didn't always believe in, and how she'd started to feel like a stranger in her own life. Noah listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving her face, his body leaning closer as if drawn by her words, her voice, the way she moved. When she spoke about the proposal, her voice grew quieter, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand. "He was a good guy," she said, her eyes distant. "But I looked at him, at that ring, and all I could think was, this isn't my story." Noah nodded, his gaze steady, his lips pressing together as if weighing his words. "You said no, because you knew what you didn't want," he said, his voice low, resonant. "That's braver than most people ever get." He took a sip of the beer, his throat moving, the bottle catching the last light as he set it down. "Me, I just keep moving so I don't have to choose." Hailey looked at him, her heart giving a small, unsteady thump. There was something in his voice, in the way he said it, that felt like a mirror. She saw herself in him, the restlessness, the hunger for something real, the fear of standing still. "Maybe we're both running," she said, her voice soft, her eyes searching his. "But right now, this feels still, in a good way." Noah's breath caught, his eyes locking with hers, and for a moment, the world was just them, the sound of the waves, the warmth of the sand, the heat of their gazes. His lips parted, a smile tugging at one corner, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that made her stomach flutter, her skin prickle. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough, like he was tasting the word. "Still, I like that." They fell silent, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that hums, that carries weight, that promises more. The beer was nearly gone. The bottle passed one last time, their fingers lingering longer now, the touch deliberate, a question neither voiced but both felt. Hailey's body was alive with it, the way her pulse raced, the way her skin felt too warm, the way her dress suddenly seemed too thin, too revealing, though she didn't move to adjust it. Noah's body, too, was a study in tension, his jaw tight, his fingers flexing, his chest rising faster, as if he was fighting to keep himself in check. "So," she said, breaking the silence, her voice low, teasing, though her eyes were anything but. "What's the plan, Noah? Sit here till the stars come out? Or are you going to try to sell me on another photo?" She tilted her head, her hair falling across her face, and she brushed it back, the gesture slow, deliberate, her fingers lingering at her neck, where her pulse beat visibly. Noah laughed, the sound warm, unguarded, and he leaned closer, his arm brushing hers now, the contact sending a spark through them both. "Stars sound good," he said, his voice dropping, his eyes holding hers. "But I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda hoping you'll stick around long enough for me to figure out what comes next." Hailey's lips curved, a smile that was half challenge, half invitation. "Careful," she said, her voice soft but sharp, her eyes glinting in the twilight. "I'm not the kind of girl who stays." But as she said it, her body leaned closer, her shoulder grazing his, her thigh inches from his, the heat of her skin a silent contradiction. Noah's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips for a moment before returning to her eyes. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble, "because I'm not the kind of guy who asks you to." But his hand, resting in the sand, shifted closer to hers, their fingers almost touching, the space between them, a promise, a dare, a moment that could change everything. The twilight deepened, the sky a canvas of indigo and rose, and they sat there, two strangers who felt like anything but, their words and silences weaving a thread that neither could see but both could feel. Hailey's body was a song of curves, her skin, the way she moved calling to Noah in a language older than words, and Noah, with his strength, his scars, his quiet intensity, was an answer she hadn't known she was seeking. They were on the edge of something, teetering, and the night was still young. The Oaxaca sky had surrendered to twilight, a deep velvet indigo streaked with ribbons of coral and gold, the kind of sunset that felt like a secret shared between the sea and the stars. The beach was nearly deserted now, the last of the day's wanderers retreating to bungalows and bars, leaving only the rhythmic sigh of the waves and the soft crunch of sand underfoot. Hailey Tran and Noah Beckett stood at the water's edge, their silhouettes framed against the fading light, two figures caught in a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal. The air was warm, heavy with salt and possibility, and the breeze tugged at their clothes, their hair, their resolve, as if urging them closer. Hailey stood with her toes in the surf, the cool water lapping at her ankles, sending tiny shivers up her legs. Her white sundress fluttered in the wind, clinging to her body in a way that was almost sinful, outlining every curve, the gentle swell of her breasts, the taper of her waist, the roundness of her hips that swayed slightly as she shifted her weight. The dress's thin straps had slipped further down her shoulders, revealing the smooth expanse of her collarbone, the delicate hollow at the base of her throat where a faint pulse beat, visible in the dim light. Her skin, kissed by days under the Mexican sun, glowed with a golden warmth, and her hair, dark and untamed, cascaded over her shoulders, catching the breeze in a dance of shadows and light. A few strands grazed her cheek, and she brushed them away with a slow, unconscious grace, her fingers lingering near her lips, full and slightly parted, as if tasting the moment. Her body was a study in contradiction, soft, yet strong, open yet guarded. Her legs, long and toned, glistened with seawater, the muscles flexing subtly as she balanced against the tide. Her arms, slender but defined, hung loosely at her sides, though her fingers twitched, as if itching to reach for something or someone. Her eyes, those deep, almond-shaped pools of midnight, flickered between the horizon and Noah, searching, questioning, wanting. She was 30, a woman who'd walked away from a life others dreamed of, and here, on this wild beach, she stood like a siren, not luring but inviting, her presence a quiet challenge to the man beside her. Noah stood a step away, the water swirling around his bare feet, his jeans rolled up to his calves, revealing ankles strong and dusted with sand. His linen shirt, unbuttoned now, billowed in the breeze, exposing the broad planes of his chest, the taut lines of his abdomen, the faint trail of dark hair that disappeared beneath his waistband. His body was a map of his journey stand to a deep bronze, scarred in places only a lover would notice, muscles carved by years of climbing mountains, crossing deserts, carrying the weight of a life lived on his terms. His shoulders were broad, sloping into arms that looked capable of holding the world at bay, or pulling someone close with a tenderness that could unravel them. His forearms, corded with veins, bore the compass tattoo on his left wrist, its needle pointing to a north that existed only in his heart. His hair, those chestnut curls, was a tousled mess, some strands clinging to his forehead, others catching the last light in streaks of gold and copper. Up close, Noah was breathtaking, not in a polished magazine cover way, but in the raw, lived-in beauty of a man who'd seen too much to lie, felt too much to hide. His jaw, strong and shadowed with stubble, tightened as he looked at Hailey, his lips, full and slightly chapped, parting as if to speak but holding back. His eyes, hazel with flecks of green and gold, were a storm of warmth and sorrow, fringed by lashes that softened his rugged edges. A small scar above his eyebrow caught the light, a story untold, and his smile, when it came, was slow, deliberate, the kind that made Hailey's breath hitch, her skin prickle. He stood with a casual grace, one hand in his pocket, the other dangling by his side, fingers flexing as if they, too, were searching for something to hold. They'd left the spot where they'd shared the beer, the conversation that had peeled back their defenses, and started walking along the shore, neither suggesting it, but both moving as if drawn by the same invisible thread. The sand was cool now, yielding under their steps, and the water teased their feet, a playful rhythm that matched the pulse of their words. They talked, but it was different, now less guarded, more urgent, as if the fading light had stripped away the last of their pretenses. "So," Hailey said, her voice low, teasing, though her eyes were soft, vulnerable. "You've seen half the world, Noah. What's the one place you'd go back to?" She glanced at him, her head tilted, her hair falling across one shoulder, exposing the curve of her neck, where a bead of seawater glistened, begging to be traced. Noah's gaze lingered there for a moment, his throat tightening, before he looked out at the sea, his lips curving into a half-smile. "Tough call," he said, his voice warm, gravelly, like a fire crackling in the dark. "But maybe Patagonia. The wind there, it's like it's trying to tell you something, but you'll never quite hear it. Makes you feel small, but alive." He turned to her, his eyes locking with hers, and there was a weight to his words, a confession hidden in the spaces between. "What about you? Where's your place?" Hailey's lips parted, a breath escaping as she considered the question. She stepped closer to the water, letting it swirl around her ankles, her dress fluttering against her thighs, the fabric clinging to her skin in a way that made Noah's fingers twitch. "I don't know if I have one," she said finally, her voice softer, almost wistful. "Maybe that's why I'm here, to find it or to stop looking." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his, and there was a rawness there, a need to be understood that made his chest ache. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, the water splashing against his calves, his shirt catching the breeze and billowing open, revealing more of his chest, the taut skin over muscle, the faint scars that told stories she wanted to hear. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, intimate, "it's not about the place, it's about the moment, the people you're with." His eyes held hers, steady, unyielding, and she felt it, the pull, the spark, the thing that made her want to step closer, to see how far this could go. They walked on, their steps slow, deliberate, the conversation weaving between light and heavy, laughter and silence. Noah told her about the time he'd slept under the stars in the Atacama Desert, the sky so clear it felt like he could touch the Milky Way. Hailey shared a memory of sneaking onto a rooftop in San Francisco with her college friends, watching the city lights while passing a bottle of cheap wine. Their words were a bridge, each story a step closer, each glance a question. But it was their bodies that spoke loudest, the way Hailey's hips swayed as she walked, the way Noah's shoulders shifted, the way their arms brushed once, then again, each touch a spark that threatened to ignite. The sun was nearly gone now, a thin line of fire on the horizon, and they paused, standing side by side, the water lapping at their feet. Hailey's dress was damp at the hem, clinging to her calves, her skin glistening with seawater and sweat, her body a silhouette of curves and shadows that made Noah's breath catch. He stood close, closer than he'd meant to, his arm grazing hers, the contact sending a jolt through them both. Neither moved away. "You ever feel like you're waiting for something?" she said suddenly, her voice soft, almost lost in the sound of the waves. "But you don't know what it is?" She looked at him, her eyes wide, vulnerable, her lips parted, and the question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Noah's gaze softened, his lips pressing together as he nodded. "All the time," he said, his voice rough, raw. "Like there's a piece of you out there, and you'll know it when you find it." He stepped closer, his body angled toward her, his hand brushing against hers. Not quite holding, but close enough to feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremble of her fingers. And then it happened, unplanned, unforced, inevitable. Their hands found each other, fingers brushing, then intertwining, not tightly, not possessively, but gently, like a promise whispered in the dark. Hailey's hand was soft, her fingers slender, her nails short but neat, the warmth of her skin a contrast to the coolness of the water. Noah's hand was larger, rougher, calloused from years of gripping camera straps and climbing ropes, but his touch was careful, reverent, as if he was afraid she might vanish if he held too tight. The contact was electric, a current that ran from their fingertips to their cores, making Hailey's pulse race, making Noah's chest tighten. They stood there, hands linked, the water swirling around their ankles, the sky darkening above them. Neither spoke, but their bodies did. Hailey's shoulders relaxing, her body leaning slightly toward him, her dress clinging to her curves, her breasts rising with each breath. Noah's posture softened, his thumb brushing the back of her hand, a small, unconscious gesture that sent a shiver through her. His eyes, those hazel depths, held hers, and there was a question in them, a want, a fear, all tangled together. "If you disappear tomorrow," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I won't ask why, but tonight, let's be real. Just you and me." His words were a plea, a challenge, a surrender, and they hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Hailey's breath caught, her lips parting as she looked at him, really looked. His face was inches from hers, his stubble catching the last light, his lips close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. His body was a promise as strong, scarred, alive, the kind of body that could hold her through a storm or let her go when she needed to run. She saw the sadness in his eyes, the hunger, the man who'd walked 1,000 roads but stood here, now, for her. She nodded, a small, deliberate movement, her eyes never leaving his. It wasn't a word, but it was everything: an invitation, an agreement, a step across a line they both knew they couldn't uncross. Her hand tightened in his, just enough to say, "I'm here, for now." Noah's smile was slow, soft, the kind that made her heart ache and her body hum. He didn't pull her closer, didn't push, but his thumb brushed her hand again, and it was enough to make her imagine more: his hands on her waist, her hips, her skin. They turned, still hand in hand, and started walking back along the shore, the water cooler now, the stars beginning to prick the sky. Their steps were unhurried, their bodies close, their hands a tether that felt like the only thing keeping them grounded. Hailey's dress caught the breeze, billowing around her thighs, her legs moving with a grace that made Noah's throat tighten. Her body was a song, each step a note: her hips, her waist, the curve of her spine visible through the thin fabric, the way her hair swayed, brushing her bare shoulders. Noah's body answered his shoulders squared, his chest rising faster, his hand holding hers with a care that belied the strength in his frame. They were two people who'd spent their lives running, but here, now, they walked together, their hands linked, their hearts open, if only for a night. The bungalow wasn't far, its lights a soft glow against the darkening beach. But they didn't rush. They let the moment stretch, let the tension build, let the touch of their hands say what words couldn't. Hailey felt alive, her skin tingling, her body awake in a way it hadn't been in years. Noah felt it too, his pulse pounding, his body humming with the need to be closer, to know her, to hold this moment before it slipped away. They didn't know what came next, but they knew this. Tonight, they were real. Tonight, they were enough. The Oaxaca night was alive, a tapestry of deep indigo sky pierced by stars that glittered like promises too fragile to keep. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of salt and blooming jasmine, carried on a breeze, that whispered through the open windows of Noah Beckett's bungalow. The small, weathered structure sat perched on a low rise overlooking the beach, its wooden walls bleached by sun and sea, its roof thatched with palm fronds that rustled softly in the wind. Inside, the space was simple but intimate, a single room with a low bed draped in white linens, a wooden chair piled with Noah's worn backpack, a table cluttered with camera lenses and half-read books. The windows were flung wide, their gauzy curtains billowing like ghosts, letting the night spill in, bathing everything in a soft, silvery glow. Hailey Tran stood just inside the doorway, her bare feet cool against the worn floorboards, her body a silhouette against the starlight. Her white sundress clung to her, damp from the sea and the evening's heat, outlining every curve with a reverence that felt almost sacred. The fabric hugged the swell of her breasts, the dip of her waist, the flare of her hips, its hem grazing her thighs, revealing legs that were long, toned, and glistening with the faintest sheen of sweat and salt. Her skin, golden under the sun, now shimmered in the moonlight, a canvas of warmth and shadow, each curve an invitation, each line a story. Her hair, dark and wild, fell in loose waves over her shoulders, a few strands clinging to her neck, where a bead of perspiration traced a slow path down to her collarbone, that delicate ridge where her pulse beat visibly, quick and alive. Her lips, full and rosy, parted slightly as she took in the room, her breath shallow, her eyes those deep, almond-shaped pools of midnight flickering, with a mix of curiosity, desire, and something softer, something vulnerable. Noah stood a few steps away, his body framed by the window, the starlight catching the planes of his face, the strong line of his jaw shadowed with stubble. His linen shirt was gone, discarded somewhere on the beach or the path to the bungalow, leaving his chest bare, the muscles sculpted by years of wandering broad shoulders, a tapered torso, the faint ripple of abs that spoke of strength earned through living, not posing. His skin was bronzed, marked by faint, scarce a thin line across his ribs, a nick on his shoulder reach, a testament to a life of risk and resilience. His jeans hung low on his hips, the denim soft and worn, hinting at the V-shaped cut of his pelvis, a detail that made Hailey's breath catch. His arms, strong and corded with veins, hung loosely at his sides, though his fingers flexed, as if resisting the urge to reach for her. His hair, those chestnut curls, was a tousled mess, some strands falling into his eyes, others catching the light in streaks of gold and copper. His eyes, hazel with flecks of green and gold, held hers, warm and intense, a storm of want and restraint, fringed by lashes that softened his rugged edges. They had walked back from the beach hand in hand, their fingers intertwined, the silence between them thick with anticipation, each step a surrender to the pull that had been building since that first glance. The bungalow's door had creaked open, and Hailey had stepped inside, her heart pounding, her body alive with the awareness of him, his warmth, his scent, the way his presence filled the space like a melody she couldn't stop humming. Noah had followed, closing the door with a soft click, the sound final, intimate, a line crossed. Now, they stood facing each other, the room small but vast with possibility, the air charged with the kind of tension that comes when two people know they're about to change each other, if only for a night. Noah took a step closer, his bare feet silent on the floor, his eyes never leaving hers. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, rough, like gravel smoothed by the sea. There was no pressure in his tone, only care. A question that gave her an out, though his body taut, alive, leaning slightly toward her betrayed how much he wanted her to stay. Hailey's lips curved into a small, certain smile, her eyes steady, her voice soft but firm. "I'm here, aren't I?" She tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder, exposing the curve of her neck, the soft hollow where her pulse raced. The gesture was unconscious but magnetic, and Noah's breath hitched, his eyes darkening as he took another step, closing the distance until they were inches apart, close enough to feel the heat radiating from each other's skin. He reached out, slow and deliberate, his hand hovering for a moment before his fingers brushed her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear. His touch was light, reverent, but it sent a jolt through her, her skin tingling where his fingers grazed her temple, her cheek. His hand lingered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, the pad rough against her softness, a contrast that made her pulse quicken. Her lips parted, a soft exhale escaping, and she leaned into his touch, her body answering before her mind could catch up. Noah's eyes followed the path of his hand, his gaze tracing her face, the high cheekbones, the faint freckles dusting her nose, the curve of her lips that seemed made for kissing, for whispering secrets in the dark. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with a sincerity that made her heart ache. His hand slid lower, his fingers brushing the side of her neck, pausing where her pulse fluttered, as if he wanted to feel her life under his touch. Hailey's breath caught, her body arching slightly, the dress shifting to reveal more of her collarbone, the soft swell of her breasts, the skin glowing in the moonlight. She reached up, her hand finding his wrist, her fingers wrapping around it, feeling the strength there, the warmth, the faint pulse that matched her own. "So are you," she said, her voice low, laced with a hunger she hadn't meant to reveal. Her eyes flicked to his chest, the smooth planes of muscle, the scars that told stories she wanted to learn, the trail of dark hair that led lower, disappearing into his jeans. Her hand moved, sliding up his arm, her fingers tracing the curve of his bicep, the skin warm and taut, the muscle flexing under her touch. It was bold, deliberate, a claim as much as an exploration, and Noah's eyes darkened, his lips parting as a soft groan escaped him. They moved closer, drawn by a gravity neither could resist, their bodies brushing Noah's breasts, grazing his chest, the thin fabric of her dress no barrier to the heat of him, the hardness of his frame. His hands found her waist, strong and sure, his fingers splaying across the curve of her hips, pulling her gently against him. The contact was electric, her softness against his strength, her curves fitting into his angles as if they'd been carved for each other. Hailey's hand slid to his shoulders, her fingers digging into the muscle there, feeling the power beneath, the restraint he was fighting to maintain. Her nails grazed his skin, a light scrape that made him shudder, his grip tightening on her hips, the denim of his jeans brushing against her thighs, a friction that sent sparks through her core. Their faces were close now, their breaths mingling, the air between them thick with want. Noah's lips hovered near hers, not touching, not yet, his eyes searching hers for permission, for certainty. Hailey's gaze was steady, her lips parting further, a silent yes that spoke louder than words. He leaned in, slow, deliberate, and kissed her not on the lips, but on the soft skin just below her ear, a place where her pulse raced, where her scent was strongest, a mix of salt and jasmine, and something uniquely her. His lips were warm, firm, the faint scratch of his stubble, a delicious contrast to the softness of the kiss. Hailey gasped, her head tilting back, her body arching into him, her breasts pressing against his chest, the dress slipping further down one shoulder, bearing more of her skin to the moonlight. His kisses trailed lower, slow and deliberate, each one a brush of fire along her jaw, down the column of her neck, pausing at the hollow of her throat where he lingered, his tongue flicking out to taste her. A soft, reverent exploration that made her moan, the sound low and unguarded. Her hands slid into his hair, her fingers tangling in the curls, tugging lightly, urging him closer. Noah's hands moved, one sliding up her back, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine through the thin fabric, the other slipping lower, cupping the roundness of her hip, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just above her thigh. The dress rode up under his touch, revealing more of her leg, the smooth, golden skin that seemed to glow, inviting his hands, his lips, his everything. Hailey's body was alive, every nerve singing, her skin hypersensitive to his touch, his breath, the way his body pressed against hers. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at him, her eyes heavy with desire, her lips swollen from the tension of wanting. She reached for the strap of her dress, slipping it fully off her shoulder, letting the fabric fall lower, revealing the soft curve of her breast, the edge of lace beneath. A glimpse that made Noah's breath catch, his eyes darkening to a shade that was almost feral, but he didn't rush, didn't take. He waited, his hands still on her, his gaze locked with hers, giving her control, letting her set the pace. She stepped back, her hands finding the hem of her dress, and with a slow, deliberate movement, she lifted it over her head, letting it fall to the floor in a whisper of fabric. She stood before him in nothing but a simple lace, bra and panties, black against her golden skin, the contrast stark and breathtaking. Her body was a masterpiece, slender but soft, with curves that begged to be traced, breasts full and lifted by the lace, a waist that flared into hips that swayed slightly as she stood, legs long and strong, the muscles flexing as she shifted her weight. Her skin glowed in the starlight, every inch of her alive, inviting, a vision that made Noah's throat tighten, his hands clench with the need to touch. Noah's eyes roamed her, slow and reverent, taking in every detail, the faint freckles across her chest, the curve of her ribs, the soft dip of her navel, the way her thighs pressed together, a subtle sign of her own desire. "God, Hailey," he breathed, his voice rough, raw, a prayer and a plea. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for her, but he paused, his eyes searching hers again, asking one last time. She answered by closing the distance, her hands finding his chest, her fingers splaying across the warm, taut skin, feeling the heartbeat beneath, strong and fast. She slid her hands lower, tracing the lines of his abs, the trail of hair that led to his jeans, her fingers brushing the waistband, a tease that made him groan. Noah's hands found her again, one cupping her face, his thumb brushing her lips, the other sliding to her lower back, pulling her against him, their bodies flush now, skin to skin. The heat of them, a fire that threatened to consume. Their lips met finally, a kiss that was slow at first, exploratory, a tasting of each other, her softness, his warmth, the faint salt of the sea on their tongues. But it deepened, grew urgent, their mouths moving with a hunger that had been building all night, all day, perhaps all their lives. Hailey's hands roamed his back, her nails grazing his skin, drawing a low moan from him that vibrated against her lips. Noah's hands explored her, one sliding up to cup her breast through the lace, his thumb brushing the peak, making her gasp into his mouth, her body arching into his touch. The other hand slipped lower, tracing the curve of her hip, the edge of her panties, his fingers teasing the sensitive skin there, a promise of more. They moved toward the bed, a slow dance of touches and kisses, their bodies never parting, the starlight painting them in silver and shadow. Hailey's bra fell away, then her panties, each piece discarded with a reverence that made her feel worshipped, desired in a way that was both fierce and tender. Noah's jeans followed, revealing the full strength of him, legs muscled and strong, hips narrow, his arousal evident, a sight that made Hailey's breath catch, her body responding with a heat that pooled low in her core. They fell onto the bed, the linens cool against their heated skin, their bodies entwining, legs tangling, hands exploring. It wasn't rushed, wasn't frantic, but it was intense, deliberate, each touch a discovery, each kiss a confession. Noah's lips found her breast, his tongue tracing circles that made her moan, her back arching, her fingers gripping his hair. Hailey's hands roamed his body, tracing the scars, the muscles, the places that made him shudder, made him whisper her name like a prayer. Their bodies moved together, finding a rhythm that was both gentle and fierce, a dance of give and take, of surrender and claim. When they finally joined, it was slow, deliberate, their eyes locked, their breaths mingling, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle long scattered. Hailey's legs wrapped around him, her hips rising to meet his, her hands clutching his shoulders, her nails leaving faint marks that he'd carry like a secret. Noah moved with a care that belied his strength, his hands framing her face, his lips brushing hers, his body worshiping hers with every thrust, every touch. It was lovemaking, not just sex, a connection that went beyond skin, beyond the moment, a meeting of two souls who'd found each other in the vastness of the world, if only for a night. The night stretched, their bodies moving together, slowing, then quickening, their moans and whispers filling the room, mingling with the sound of the waves outside. They explored each other, learned each other, gave and took until they were spent, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths ragged, their hearts full. They lay together afterward, tangled in the sheets, Hailey's head on Noah's chest, his arm around her, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. The starlight streamed through the window, bathing them in a glow that felt like a blessing. And for a moment, the world was perfect two people. One night, no past, no future, only now. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Their bodies had said everything, every touch, every kiss, every shudder. A vow to remember this, to carry it with them, no matter where the road led next. The night was theirs, and they held it close, knowing it would end, but not yet, not yet. The Oaxaca morning dawned soft and golden, the first rays of sunlight slipping through the open windows of Noah's bungalow, painting the room in a warm, honeyed glow. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of salt and the lingering musk of the night before, a quiet reminder of the intimacy that had unfolded under the stars. The bed was a tangle of white linens, rumpled and dusted with fine grains of sand, evidence of two bodies that had found each other in the dark and held on until dawn. Hailey Tran lay curled against Noah Beckett, her head nestled in the crook of his arm, her body pressed to his, their legs entwined, in a way that felt both natural and fleeting, like a melody you hum once and never forget. Hailey stirred first, her eyes fluttering open, the light catching the deep brown of her irises, flecked with hints of amber that seemed to glow in the morning sun. Her hair, dark and wild, spilled across the pillow and Noah's chest, a cascade of midnight waves that tangled around her shoulders, a few strands clinging to her cheek where sleep had pressed them. Her skin, golden and smooth, was warm from the night, marked faintly in places, a soft redness on her neck, a subtle bruise on her hip traces of Noah's touch, of a passion that had been both fierce and tender. She lay on her side, one arm draped across his torso, her fingers resting lightly on the plane of his stomach, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. Her body was a vision, even in repose slender, but soft, with curves that invited the eye, the swell of her breasts, partially covered by the sheet, the dip of her waist, the flare of her hips that disappeared beneath the fabric, her legs long and toned, one bent slightly, the other stretched out, her toes brushing his calf. Noah was still asleep. His face relaxed, the lines of his jaw softened, his lips slightly parted, a faint curve to them as if he were dreaming of something sweet. His chest, broad and bronzed, rose and fell steadily, the muscles defined but not ostentatious, marked by scars that told stories of a life lived boldly, a thin line across his ribs, a nick on his shoulder, each a badge of survival. His arms, strong and corded with veins, encircled her, one hand resting on her lower back, the fingers splayed possessively, as if even in sleep he couldn't bear to let her go. His hair, those chestnut curls, was a tousled mess, some strands falling across his forehead, others catching the sunlight in streaks of gold and copper. The compass tattoo on his wrist was visible, its needle pointing nowhere specific, a symbol of a man who followed his own path. His body was warm, solid, the kind of presence that made the world feel safe, if only for a moment, and Hailey felt it, the weight of him, the reality of him, the man who'd undone her with a glance, a touch, a night. She shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, her hand sliding up his chest, her fingers tracing the curve of his collarbone, the faint stubble that shadowed his jaw. Her touch was light, exploratory, as if memorizing him, storing the feel of his skin, the warmth of his body, for the road ahead. Her movement made the sheet slip lower, revealing more of her breasts, full and soft, the curve of her ribcage, the smooth expanse of her stomach, the delicate dip of her navel. She was beautiful, not in a polished way, but in the raw, lived-in way of a woman who'd chosen herself, who carried her scars and her strength with equal grace. Her lips, full and rosy, curved into a small, private smile as she watched him, her eyes soft with a mix of tenderness and resolve. Noah stirred then, his eyes opening slowly, the hazel depths catching the light, shifting from green to gold, fringed by lashes that gave him a boyish charm despite his rugged edges. He looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of the night, the intimacy they'd shared, the knowledge that this was temporary. His smile came slowly, warm and unguarded, the kind that made Hailey's heart ache, her body hum with the memory of his hands, his lips, his everything. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, low and intimate, like a secret shared between lovers. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft, laced with a warmth she hadn't expected. She propped herself up on one elbow, the sheet falling further, baring her shoulder, her chest, her skin glowing in the sunlight, a vision that made Noah's breath catch, his eyes darkening with a hunger he didn't try to hide. But there was something else in his gaze, too, something tender, something that saw her, not just her body, but her soul, the woman who'd walked away from a ring, a life, to find herself here, in this moment, with him. They lay there for a while, not rushing, not speaking, just existing in the quiet beauty of the morning. His hand moved, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back, following the curve of her spine, the soft skin just above her hip, each touch a reminder of the night, a promise of the hours they still had. Hailey's hand rested on his chest, her fingers brushing the faint hair there, the scars, the heartbeat that seemed to sync with her own. Their bodies were close, pressed together, the warmth of them a cocoon against the world outside, and for a moment, it was enough, more than enough. Eventually, they rose, the pull of hunger and the day drawing them from the bed. Noah pulled on his jeans, the denim settling low on his hips, revealing the V-shaped cut of his pelvis, the muscles that flexed as he moved, a sight that made Hailey's pulse quicken, her body remembering his strength, his care. She slipped into his shirt, the linen soft and oversized, hanging off one shoulder, the hem grazing her thighs, leaving her legs bare, long and golden, the kind of legs that could stop time. The shirt smelled of hemp cedar, salt, something uniquely Noah-hand. She inhaled deeply, her eyes closing for a moment, savoring it. They moved to the small table by the window, where Noah had set out a simple breakfast: mangoes sliced into bright wedges, a loaf of crusty bread, a pot of coffee steaming in the morning air. The fruit was vibrant, the mangoes dripping with juice, their sweetness a burst of life on the tongue. Hailey sat across from him, her legs tucked beneath her, the shirt riding up to reveal more of her thigh, the smooth skin catching the light, a distraction that made Noah's hand pause. His coffee cup halfway to his lips. She noticed, and her lips curved into a teasing smile, her eyes glinting with mischief, a silent acknowledgement of the pull between them. They ate slowly, sharing the food, their fingers brushing as they passed the mangoes, the bread, each touch a spark that kept the night's fire smoldering. Noah's eyes followed her, taking in the way the shirt slipped further, revealing the curve of her shoulder, the hint of her breast, the way her hair fell across her face as she leaned forward, tucking a strand behind her ear with a grace that was both unconscious and magnetic. His body was a study in restraint, this jaw tight, his fingers flexing around the coffee cup, his chest rising faster as he watched her, wanting her again, always, but holding back, letting her lead. Hailey felt it, the way his gaze warmed her skin, the way his presence filled the room, the way his body, even now, called to hers. She leaned back in the chair, stretching slightly, the shirt lifting to reveal the curve of her hip, the edge of her panties, a glimpse that made Noah's throat tighten, his eyes darkening. But it wasn't just desire. It was the way he looked at her, like she was a moment he'd carry forever, a memory he'd chase across continents. And she looked at him the same way, his strong hands, his scarred chest, the curls that fell into his eyes, the smile that was both boyish and knowing, the man who'd given her a night of truth, of connection, of being seen. They talked, their voices soft, the conversation light but laced with meaning. Noah told her about a sunrise he'd seen in Peru, the way the mountains seemed to hold their breath, as the light broke. Hailey shared a memory of her grandmother's garden in San Francisco, the way the jasmine bloomed at night, filling the air with a sweetness that felt like home. Their words were a bridge, a way to hold on to each other a little longer, but beneath them was the unspoken knowledge that this was ending, that the morning was a gift, not a guarantee. As the sun climbed higher, Hailey set her coffee down, her eyes meeting his, steady and resolute. "I'm leaving at noon," she said, her voice calm but firm, the words cutting through the warmth of the moment like a blade. "No numbers, no searching. It stays here." Her lips pressed together, her eyes searching his, looking for understanding, for acceptance, for the strength to let her go. Noah's smile faded, his eyes softening, a flicker of pain crossing his face before he nodded. He leaned forward, his hand reaching for hers, his fingers wrapping around her wrist, his thumb brushing the pulse point there, feeling her life, her resolve. "I know," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion, "but I'll never forget you, Hailey. Not this. Not you." His eyes held hers, and there was a weight to his words, a promise that he'd carry her with him, in the photos he took, the roads he walked, the quiet moments when the world felt too big. She nodded, her throat tight, her hand turning to clasp his, their fingers intertwining, the touch a lifeline, a farewell. "Same," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes bright with unshed tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude, of fullness. She leaned across the table, her lips finding his, a kiss that was soft, slow, a sealing of the night, the morning, the everything. His hand slid to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her gently, savoring her, the taste of coffee and mangoes on their tongues, the warmth of their breaths mingling. They pulled back, their foreheads resting together, their eyes closed, breathing each other in one last time. Then Hailey stood, the shirt falling back into place, her body moving with a grace that made Noah's chest ache. She gathered her dress from the floor, slipping it on, the fabric clinging to her curves. Her skin, a reminder of the night, of her. Noah watched, his hands clenched, his body still, memorizing her, the way she moved, the way she smiled, the way she was his, if only for a moment. They stepped outside, the sun higher now, the beach stretching before them, alive with the day. Hailey turned to him, her eyes bright, her smile small but real. "Take care, Noah," she said, her voice steady, her hand brushing his arm, a final touch that burned. "You too," he said, his voice rough, his smile breaking through, the kind that made her heart skip, made her want to stay, though she knew she couldn't. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that felt like a signature, a mark of their time. She stepped back, her eyes holding his for a moment longer, then turned, walking toward the path that led to the road, her dress catching the breeze, her hair swaying, her body a vision that Noah knew he'd see in every sunset, every wave, every quiet night. He watched until she was a silhouette, then a memory, his hand closing around the camera that hung around his neck, the weight of it a comfort, a promise to keep her in his way. The morning was over, but the feeling lingered, the warmth of her, the truth of her, the smile that said everything. They didn't name each other, didn't need to, they'd remember. The New York autumn was crisp, the air sharp, with the scent of fallen leaves and city ambition. a stark contrast to the languid warmth of Oaxaca's shores. The streets of Soho buzzed with life taxis honking, pedestrians weaving through each other, the hum of conversations spilling from coffee shops and galleries. Hailey Tran walked along a quieter side street, her boots clicking softly against the cobblestones, her breath visible in the cool October air. At 30, she was a woman, transformed, though the changes were subtle, etched in the way she carried herself, shoulders squared, chin lifted, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before Mexico. Her dark hair, now cut to just below her shoulders, swung lightly as she moved, catching the late afternoon light in glints of obsidian. She wore a tailored wool coat, deep navy, cinched at the waist, accentuating her slender frame, the curve of her hips, the legs that strode with purpose in fitted jeans. Her skin, still kissed by the summer sun, glowed against the city's gray, and her eyes, those deep, almond-shaped pools of midnight, held a spark, a secret, a story only she knew. It had been 6 months since Oaxaca, since the night with Noah Beckett, since the morning she'd walked away without looking back. She'd returned to San Francisco, then moved to New York, chasing a new job, a new chapter, a version of herself that felt truer. The creative agency she worked for was thriving, her campaigns bolder, her voice stronger, as if that night under the stars had unlocked something in her, a courage to live without apology. But Noah lingered not as a regret, but as a warmth, a memory that surfaced in quiet moments, in the sound of waves on a podcast, in the scent of cedar on a stranger's jacket. She hadn't searched for him, hadn't broken her own rule, but she carried him, in the way her fingers sometimes traced her collarbone, remembering his lips, or the way her smile softened when she saw a camera slung around someone's neck. She paused outside a small gallery, its windows glowing with soft light, the sign above the door reading, "Moments in Time." A photographic journey. The display caught her eye, a series of black and white prints, each capturing a fleeting instant, a child chasing a kite, a fisherman casting his net, a woman dancing in the rain. But one photo stopped her cold, her breath catching, her heart giving a sudden, unsteady thump. There, framed in simple wood, was her Hailey on that Oaxaca beach, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She was half-turned, her hair spilling over one shoulder, her sundress clinging to her curves, the sea a shimmering backdrop. Her face was dreamy, unguarded, her lips parted slightly, her eyes fixed on something or someone beyond the frame. The photograph was stunning, not just for its composition, but for what it held. A moment so raw, so real, it felt like a heartbeat captured in ink. Hailey stepped closer, her reflection merging with the glass, her fingers brushing the frame as if to confirm it was real. The title card beneath the photo read, "The girl from Oaxaca. I never knew her name, but I remember her soul, N.B." The initials hit her like a wave, and she exhaled, a soft, shaky sound that was part laugh, part sigh. Noah. Of course it was him. She could almost see him, crouched on that beach, his hazel eyes intense behind the camera, his curls falling into his face, his voice low and warm as he'd said, "Just be you." The memory flooded Harris' touch, his laugh, the way their bodies had moved together, the way they'd parted with nothing but a smile and a promise to remember. She stood there, lost in the image, her body alive with the echo of that night. Her coat felt too warm, her skin tingling as if his hands were on her again, tracing her spine, cupping her hip, pulling her close. She could picture him now, his broad shoulders, The scars on his chest, the compass tattoo on his wrist, the way his jeans hung low, revealing the strength of him, the man who'd seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else had. Her lips curved into a smile, small but real, and she felt a pull, a curiosity, a wonder about where he was now, what roads he'd walked, what moments he'd captured since. The gallery door opened, and a woman stepped out, her gray hair pulled into a bun, her eyes kind but sharp. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, nodding at the photo. "The artist has a way of finding the soul in things. This one's been getting a lot of attention." Hailey nodded, her throat tight, her voice steady but soft. "Do you know him? The photographer?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, breaking her own rule. But she needed to know, needed something, even if it was just a thread to hold on to. The woman smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "Noah? He's a wanderer. Dropped these off a month ago. Said he was heading to Morocco next. Or maybe Iceland. Never stays still long enough to pin down." She paused, studying Hailey, as if sensing the connection. "You look like you know him." Hailey's smile was cryptic, her eyes flickering to the photo. "Maybe," she said, her voice low, laced with a warmth that betrayed her. "Or maybe I just know escape was a blur, but the figure was unmistakable." She stepped back, her hand brushing the edge of her coat, the wool soft under her fingers. "Thanks for the tip." The woman nodded, already turning back to the gallery. "Come back for the artist talk next week. You might catch him, if he's in town." She disappeared inside, leaving Hailey alone with the photo, the street, the city. Hailey lingered, her eyes tracing the lines of the image, the light, the memory. She didn't know if she'd go to the talk, didn't know if she wanted to find him, to break the spell of that night by giving it a name, a future. But the possibility was there, a door left ajar, a story unfinished. She felt it, the pull of him, the what if, the maybe. Her body hummed with it, her skin warm beneath her coat, her lips parting as she exhaled, her breath a faint cloud in the autumn air. She was Hailey Tran, a woman who'd said no to a life she didn't want, who'd found herself in a stranger's arms, who'd walked away but never forgotten. And Noah, wherever he was, whatever he was chasing was part of her, a piece of her soul captured in light and shadow. She stepped back, her boots scuffing the cobblestones, and turned to walk away, the city swallowing her into its rhythm. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, her coat, a breeze that felt like a whisper from a far-off beach, from a night under the stars, from a man who'd seen her soul. It was a goodbye, a hello, a question, unanswered. She smiled, her lips curving with a secret, and kept walking. The photo a memory, the future a blank page. What happened next? Did Hailey go to the artist's talk? Stand in a crowded room, her eyes searching for a familiar face? Did Noah, halfway across the world, pause in a market or a desert, a sudden memory of her stopping him cold? Did their paths cross again, or did they carry each other only in photographs and dreams? The story doesn't end here, it stretches beyond the frame, into the unknown, where two souls who met by chance might find each other again, or might not. To find out what happens next, to see if Hailey and Noah's story continues, stay tuned to this channel. The next chapter is coming, and it's one you won't want to miss.